Oh my God, Dr. Megan, have you seen Baby Reindeer? It's blowing up on Netflix and it's really well done, but oh, it's very dark and heavy. I get it. After a few therapy sessions where Baby Reindeer came up, I decided I had to watch it myself. It was beautiful and traumatic. I thought I could handle it, but watching that show, it just brought everything back. The stalking, the fear, the violation. I feel like I'm back there in that moment. And yet, I can't stop watching. It's like I'm glued to the screen. At one point, I even turned it off, and I'm like, why am I even watching this? But then I had to turn it back on to see what happened. It's like I'm reliving it over and over again. There were definitely moments where I wanted to turn it off as well. I think when you're watching that kind of content, you have to be very careful not to trauma bond. But why can't I just turn it off? Why do I feel this pull to watch it, even though it hurts? Let's talk about trauma bonding. Trauma bonding is a psychological phenomenon where individuals form strong emotional connections with people that have caused them harm or trauma. These bonds develop as a result of intense, prolonged exposure to abusive or traumatic situations. This can lead to a complex interplay of positive and negative emotions around the perpetrator.
A quick side note, I am a therapist, but I'm not your therapist. This is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only.
Trauma bonding is more common than you think. It often occurs in abusive relationships, cults, or in manipulative environments where subjects are put to manipulation, control, exploitation. Despite experiencing harm or mistreatment, we're all thinking, like, why don't they just leave? It's because individuals may feel a sense of attachment, a dependency, an identity, even a loyalty towards their abusers. One of the key pieces of trauma bonding is that it involves intermittent reinforcement, which is the kind of reinforcement that happens at gambling. You win every so often. And so often part of the grooming process is an emotional manipulation, affectionate, sort of nurturing, caring piece. Along with intermittent reinforcement, isolation and desire for validation can often fuel these encounters. Victims can experience a cycle of abuse followed by periods of kindness or affection, which can be very confusing, but sort of maintains the cycle. It's kind of like the honeymoon stage in domestic violence. It reinforces the bond. People experiencing a trauma bond might minimize or rationalize the abuse and its harmful effects. Trauma bonding can make it very difficult to leave abusive situations. Even after leaving, the survivors may continue to struggle with feelings of attachment, guilt, shame. You could see this in the episode where he's really trying to get behind the psychology of his stalker, and even at certain points is missing the connection and validation. Part of leaving a trauma bond is basically doing therapy to increase independence and autonomy and developing healthier coping skills so that the person has the skills to get out. So just like we can get trauma bonded in relationships, we can also get trauma bonded with our media, literature, film, television. They offer us a way to escape, but also understand these powerful, complex dynamics. And the storytelling itself sometimes emotionally manipulates us to sort of identify with the characters and go through the hero's journey with them. A step behind trauma bonding is what's called Stockholm syndrome. This is a psychological phenomenon where hostages or abuse victims develop positive feelings, empathy, or even loyalty towards their captors or abusers. If you've never been through a situation like this and you're watching Baby Reindeer, I would definitely suspend the disbelief that someone could have the ambivalence or even mixed emotions, maybe even like loving feelings towards someone who's hurt them. That's why they say there's a fine line between love and hate. Think about someone you really love who's also hurt you. It's complex, right? Stockholm syndrome and trauma bonding arise from a complex array of psychological mechanisms. Victims may experience a blend of fear and gratitude for small acts of kindness and even confusion, leading them to empathize with their abusers as a coping mechanism. Let's not forget how powerful denial can be. In the case of Stockholm Syndrome, the most important thing to remember is that this attachment to the perpetrator is actually a survival mechanism. For example, a child that's in a traumatic or abusive situation, if they can't leave, the best they can do is try to make it better. And so sometimes either taking the blame, like it's my fault, when obviously it's not, just to say only an abuser can prevent abuse. It's never a victim's fault. Okay. At the same time, we often do these sort of defense mechanisms to make an inescapable situation more tolerable in the moment. However, this can really backfire as far as recovery, and it can make us stay a lot longer than we need to in traumatic or abusive situations. It's really important to know that victims of abuse or trauma are not to blame, and doing so only continues the stigma associated with trauma. The stigma and shame only keep people from getting help. I think they did a really great example of this when he goes to report the stalking and the police are dismissive. We need to tell some of these important stories so people feel less stigmatized and that we can really take on this epidemic of trauma and abuse in a mindful way and help survivors feel empowered to seek help and reclaim their autonomy. Ultimately, the decision to watch Baby Reindeer or any similar content should be made with careful consideration of your own mental health needs and boundaries. If you do choose to watch, consider seeking emotional support from trusted friends, family members, mental health professionals to help navigate any emotional challenges that may arise.